All right, so uh, are you ready to kind of turn everything you thought you knew about, performance like totally on its head?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm always up for a good mind-bending deep dive.
Perfect. Well, then buckle up because we're diving into this pretty fascinating paper
Yeah,
from Personnel Psychology, actually, way back in 2012.
2012, huh?
Yeah, so it's a bit older, but the ideas are still super relevant today. It basically challenges this idea that's, been kind of like a bedrock principle for like forever. That performance always falls into this neat little bell curve.
Right, the classic norm of normality.
Exactly. But what if that's not the whole
Sure,
story?
yeah, what if it's something else entirely?
That's exactly what this paper explores. It suggests that a Paretian distribution, also called a power law, might actually be a way better fit for understanding like how performance really works.
A power law instead of a bell curve. So instead of that gentle curve, we're talking more like a steep rise,
Right.
where like a tiny group of people achieve these insane results.
Right, and then there's this long tail where most people kind of cluster.
It's like the 80-20 rule, but on steroids.
Yeah, exactly. And this pattern, it's not just some like random theory. It shows up in all sorts of places.
Oh, yeah, like wealth distribution, city sizes, you name it.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. The evidence. These researchers, they did 5 separate studies, each one focusing on a totally different field. And the results are pretty mind-blowing. They started by looking at researchers like almost 500,000 of them across tons of different scientific fields.
Wow, 500,000 researchers. That's a serious data set.
Right. And get this, no matter what the field was like, chemistry, physics, sociology, you name it, the number of publications those researchers put out, it always fit this Paretian distribution way better than the bell curve.
Interesting. So it's like no matter what you're researching, the same pattern emerges.
Yeah. And with a data set that massive, it's definitely not just a fluke. So then they shifted gears and looked at entertainers, over 17,000 of them across movies, music, and literature.
Okay, so we're going from the lab to the stage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And guess what? Same story. Whether it was awards nominations or bestseller lists, the power law pattern kept popping up.
So it's not just about like scientific output, it's about creative achievement too.
Right. And just when you think it can't get any weirder, they even looked at politicians, over 42,000 candidates across 10 different countries.
Politicians, huh? You'd think with elections and the whole one person, one vote thing, performance might be a little more evenly distributed.
You'd think, right? But even in the wild world of politics, where individual contributions can be hard to measure, the researchers found this, that the more terms a politician served, the more likely their performance followed this power law distribution.
It's like even elections aren't immune to this outlier effect.
Okay, so we've got researchers, entertainers, politicians, all showing this pattern. Then they looked at athletes, both individual and team sports, collegiate and professional. And yep, you guessed it, their performance stats like wins, points, goals, they all lined up with this Paretian distribution.
Wow, so we're talking about like a universal pattern here across all sorts of different domains.
It's really starting to look that way. And to make things even more interesting, they even looked at negative performance things like errors in baseball or penalties in hockey.
Negative performance, so like messing up, basically.
Yeah, and incredibly, even these less desirable outcomes seem to follow this same power law pattern.
That's wild. It's like this distribution isn't just about being awesome. It's kind of baked into how we perform, period.
Right. So we've got all this evidence suggesting that maybe this bell curve, this idea that's been so central to how we think about performance, might be totally off base.
So if the bell curve is out, what does that even mean for how we understand performance?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, we've got our expert here to help us unpack the implications of all this.
All right, well, let's dive in. If we take a step back and look at the big picture, these findings could really shake things up, like some fundamental assumptions we have about, organizations, talent, even societal structures. It's pretty big stuff.
Okay, let's break it down. Where do you see this research having the biggest impact?
Well, let's start with something as basic as performance reviews. If we're using this bell curve model to evaluate everyone and performance actually follows this hockey stick distribution, are we even using the right tool? Are we potentially like totally misjudging people and what they're capable of?
Yeah, it's almost like we're setting everyone up to be average when maybe we should be looking for those outliers.
Yeah,
Those people who have the potential to really knock it out of the park.
exactly. Should we be focusing on getting everyone to some arbitrary average, or should we be trying to identify and nurture those individuals who could achieve amazing things?
And what about leadership? How do you even lead when a tiny fraction of your team might be driving most of the results?
Right. Do traditional leadership theories even apply in a world where performance is so unevenly distributed?
It's like you need a whole new playbook.
Maybe. We might need a whole new set of leadership skills, ones focused on spotting these high performers, figuring out what makes them tick, and creating an environment where they can really thrive. But at the same time, you got to make sure the rest of the team feels valued and engaged, even if their contributions look different.
It makes you wonder if traditional team structures even make sense in this kind of environment. What happens when you put a superstar on a team?
Right. Do they lift everyone up, or do they end up carrying the load while others coast?
It's a tough question and one that probably depends on a lot of factors, but it's definitely something to think about.
And if we zoom out even further, like to a societal level, things get even more interesting. If success isn't this nice even bell curve like we've always been told, what does that mean for ideas like meritocracy and quality of opportunity?
Yeah, it's almost like this research is saying that the playing field might be even more uneven than we thought, which raises all sorts of questions about fairness and how we structure things.
Exactly. If a small group of people are always driving the majority of the results, how do we make sure everyone has a fair shot? How do we reward those at the top without, like, discouraging or devaluing everyone else?
It's a lot to think about. This paper really makes us rethink some pretty basic assumptions about how the world works.
It does. And one of the most interesting things for me is how it changes how we think about talent itself. Maybe instead of thinking about talent as this fixed thing, neatly distributed on a bell curve, we should be looking at it more dynamically.
So talent is something that can change and grow depending on the situation.
Right. It's not just about finding people with natural talent. It's about creating environments where that talent can be nurtured and developed.
Makes you wonder if we're missing out on a lot of potential by clinging to this bell curve model.
Oh, totally. Imagine if we shifted our focus away from trying to fit everyone into a box and instead created systems that let people discover and cultivate their unique strengths.
Even if those strengths don't fit the traditional definition of what a top performer looks like.
Exactly. It's like we've been trying to prune everyone into the same shape when maybe we should be cultivating a whole forest of different talents.
That's a great analogy. And who knows, maybe by embracing this more dynamic understanding of talent, we could unlock all sorts of new innovations and creativity.
Definitely. But let's get practical for a second. If we accept that this power law distribution is closer to reality, how does that change how we approach things like hiring?
Yeah, how do we find those outliers, those people with that superstar potential?
Well, instead of just looking for people who tick all the boxes on a standard list of qualifications, maybe we should be looking for signs of that outlier potential.
So looking for people who are willing to take risks, think outside the box, even if they don't have the perfect resume.
Exactly. It might mean taking a chance on someone with a unique skill set or a different way of approaching problems, even if their resume isn't perfect.
It's about recognizing that those who achieve incredible things often don't follow a straight path. They might have taken detours, tried different fields, or even failed along the way.
And those experiences, those failures, those unconventional journeys might be exactly what gives them the insights and perspectives to see what others miss and to achieve breakthroughs that no one else could.
It's fascinating to think about how this research could change not only how we find talent, but also how we develop and nurture it. If we're no longer trying to fit everyone into the same mold, what does that mean for education, training, mentorship?
It suggests that we might need to move away from one-size-fits-all approaches and towards more personalized pathways that cater to individual strengths and learning styles. It might mean encouraging exploration and experimentation, letting people discover their passions and develop their unique skills in a way that works for them.
It almost feels like this research is calling for a complete change in how we think about performance and potential. It's not just about tweaking existing systems, it's about questioning the very foundation of those systems.
And that can be scary for some. It challenges deeply held beliefs about fairness, meritocracy, and the nature of success. But it also opens up a world of possibilities both for individuals and for society as a whole.
It's like we've been looking at the world through a distorted lens, and this research is giving us a new, clearer perspective. And what we see through that lens is both exciting and challenging.
It is. It suggests that we might be capable of achieving far more than we thought possible, both individually and collectively. But it also forces us to face some uncomfortable truths about the uneven distribution of talent and the limitations of our current systems.
This has been a really insightful conversation. I'm already starting to see the world a little differently, questioning assumptions I didn't even realize I was making. But before we get too carried away with these big ideas, let's bring it back down to earth. What does all of this mean for someone listening to this deep dive right now?
That's a great question, and I think it's where the rubber meets the road. This research isn't just some abstract academic thing. It has real implications for how we live our lives, how we approach our work, and how we define success for ourselves.
So if we ditch this whole bell curve thing, how do we even define success anymore? Like, we've been trained to compare ourselves to everyone else, to try to be average or above average. But if that's not the right way to think about it, then what is?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think this research is kind of telling us to redefine success on our own terms. It's not about where you land on some made up curve. It's about figuring out your own potential. Like, what are you really good at? What can you really excel at? Even if it's not what society typically thinks of as successful.
So it's about finding your own, like, personal hockey stick,
Yeah.
that area where you can really make a difference.
Exactly. It could be in a super specific niche, or maybe it's a unique set of skills, or a totally new way of approaching a problem. It's about leaning into the things that make you different, the things that give you an advantage.
It's funny because for so long we've been told to focus on our weaknesses,
Mhm.
try to become more well-rounded. But maybe that's the wrong approach. Maybe it's about going all in on our strengths, the things we could be truly amazing at.
Right. And that might mean taking risks, stepping outside your comfort zone, and being okay with failing. Those people who achieve incredible things, they're usually the ones who are willing to push the limits, try new things, and learn from their mistakes.
It's like that saying, the greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. Maybe failure isn't something to be afraid of. Maybe it's just part of the journey to achieving something truly great.
I love that. And I think this research also changes how we think about competition. If we're not all fighting for the same tiny piece of the pie, maybe there's room for more collaboration and support. Maybe we can all achieve more by working together, using each other's strengths, and helping each other reach our full potential.
It's like we've been playing this game where someone has to lose, but maybe that's not true. Maybe everyone can win.
Exactly. And I think that's a pretty hopeful message. This research challenges some deep-seated beliefs, but it also offers a vision of a world where people are free to pursue their passions, develop their talents, and make a real contribution, even if they don't fit the traditional mold.
This has been a seriously eye-opening deep dive. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty energized and optimistic.
Yeah.
It's like this research has unlocked all these new possibilities for me and for everyone, really.
Me too. It's a reminder that we have the power to create our own destinies, define success on our own terms, and build a world where everyone has a chance to thrive.
So to everyone listening, next time you're thinking about your own performance, designing a system, or even just setting goals, remember the power of the hockey stick. Don't be afraid to stand out. Don't be afraid to aim for those amazing levels of performance, because that's where the real magic happens.
And don't forget to keep asking questions, challenging assumptions, and diving deep.
This is the Deep Dive signing off. Until next time, keep exploring.